In our last video, we created this movie clip button, and what we want to happen is when we hover over this button, we want the background to extend out to the right, and then when we move our mouse cursor away from the button, we want it to animate back to where it started. Now we've created the functionality for this inside the movie clip. If we double click on it, we've created a few different states, an up, over, and out state. In our up state, we have it sitting just like it is when the user's not interacting with it, it's just sitting on the stage. When we hover over it, we want to jump to the over state and start playing that animation. So it's going to animate out to the right until it encounters the stop action in frame 18. And then when we move our mouse cursor away from it, we want it to animate out. So we'll jump out to frame 20 and play that. Now you'll notice there's no stop action at the end of this animation because it's just going to jump back to frame 1 and stop there. Because that's what it's supposed to look like anyway when that animation is finished. Okay, so now all we need to do is we need to add the action scripts to our main timeline that's actually going to make this work. So let's go back to scene 1. Make sure that our home button has an instance name. So we'll click on our home button and we see that we've given it an instance name of home_MC. That's the name we're going to have to use in our action script. And then let's rename this layer buttons. We'll create a new layer and this will be our actions layer. So lock the actions layer. We don't need to make any changes to the buttons layer either right now, so let's lock that. Click on frame 1 for the actions layer and hit F9 to open up your actions, or Option F9 if you're using a Mac. So we have our actions window open. Now what we want to do is add our code for our button. So let's add our code for our rollover. Now to add a rollover animation in ActionScript, we need to create an event listener for our button. Now our button is actually a movie clip, remember, so don't be too confused that I'm calling it a button. It's still acting like a button. So we're going to point to our home_MC movie clip. And first of all, we just want to tell it to act like a button. So let's turn button mode on. So home_MC dot button mode. Notice that the M in mode is capitalized. We'll set that equal to true. So now if we hit Control Enter, when we hover over it, we get a pointer cursor instead of just a regular arrow. That's all that button mode equals true does. It just basically treats it like a button so that when we hover over it, the user gets some kind of indication that they are hovering over something that's clickable. Okay, on the next line, let's create our event listener. So home_MC dot add event, and we see add event listener highlighted here, so we can double click on it or just hit enter. And then inside the parentheses for the add event listener, the first thing we need to put is the type of event we're listening for. Well, we're listening for a mouse event, so capital M for mouse, capital E for event, mouse event dot roll_over, all capital letters. Mouse event dot rollover, comma, space, and then we need to put the name of the function that we want to run whenever we hover over the button. So let's call that let's call that function rollover. Actually, that's a reserved word. Let's create a function called button over. There we go. And the way you know it's a reserved word is it turns blue. Notice that when we type roll over, the text turns blue there. That means that word is a part of the ActionScript language. So we'll call it button over instead. We'll close our parentheses there, semicolon to end our statement. So now we need to create that button over function. So we'll skip a couple lines, type in the word function, space, and then the name of the function, button over. And then inside parentheses, since this function is being called by an event listener, we need to put an event variable inside the parentheses as we've talked about before. So we're just going to call this E, and it's a mouse event that we're referencing here. So E colon mouse with a capital M, event with a capital E, and then close your parentheses. Now this function is not going to return any value, so we'll type colon void. And then we'll go to the next line, put our opening curly bracket, skip a couple lines, put our closing curly bracket, and then inside the curly brackets we'll type in our code. What do we want to happen whenever we hover over this button? Well, we want it to go to and play the frame labeled over. Okay? So we need to point to the current button. We could point to home_MC, but when we add more buttons later on, that's not going to work because we don't want it always to cause the home_MC button to animate out. What if we have another button, like the about button or something like that? So instead of pointing to home_MC, we're going to point to the current target of this event listener. and we're going to use this event variable right here, which is called E. So e.current_target, and this current target is the home_MC movie clip. So e.current_target dot go to, and with a capital A, play with a capital P. We're going to go to and play the frame labeled over. So we need to put over inside quotation marks and put all of that inside parentheses. So when we hover over that button, hopefully it will go to and play the over state where the background of the button is expanding out to the right. So let's test that. Control Enter. There's our button, and hopefully now when we hover over it, it will expand to the right. It does. So that's very good. Now we move away from it, it's not doing anything, but when we hover over it again, it goes back to the beginning of that animation. What we want to do now is to add the event listener for our roll out. So when we move away from it, it will return to its normal state. So let's close that. And right underneath our first event listener, we'll add another one. So home_MC.add. Then we can use our up and down arrows to scroll through these code hints. And once we get add event listener selected, we'll just hit enter to finish filling that out. And this is going to be a mouse event again, dot, and this time roll_out. And we see that selected down there in our code hint, so we can just hit enter. And we'll use a function called button out, which we're going to create now. So we'll come down here to the very bottom, skip a couple lines, and we'll create another function called button out. We need to put our event variable here, so e:mouse event, close your parentheses, :void, and then we'll put our opening and closing curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, we're going to basically do the exact same thing we did for the button over animation, except we're going to tell it to go to and play the out frame, the frame labeled out. So we really could just copy all of this, Control C to copy it, paste it down here inside the button out function, and instead of over, we'll just change that to out. So when we move our mouse cursor away from the button by triggering this roll out event, we're going to call on the button out function, which is down here. And in that button out function, we're telling the target of that function, which right now is the home_MC movie clip, to go to and play the frame labeled out. So we should see that button animating back to its original position whenever we move our mouse cursor away from it. So we'll hit Control Enter to test. There's our button. We hover over it. And we're getting some weird things happening here. Now if we come here, well, if we hover over the left half of the button, sometimes we're getting some funky happening. So let's take a look at what exactly is going on there. So we're going to close our actions here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, let's unlock the buttons layer, double click on the home button, and I'm going to create another layer at the very bottom called hit. And this is basically going to be an invisible movie clip here. So we're going to take the rectangle tool here, and we're going to create a rectangle that's a little bit bigger than the button itself. And we need to allow a little extra space for the animation out to the side. And that's a white button that we just created. That's not exactly what we want. It doesn't really matter what color it is, but we want it to be invisible. So we're going to click on that, hit F8 to convert it to a symbol. It's going to be a movie clip symbol. And let's call it hit. This is going to kind of serve as our hit state. We're going to click on OK, and then click on that movie clip, and let's actually drag this above everything else. We want it above the text layer. And with this movie clip selected, we're going to go down to color, change it from none to alpha, and then drag our alpha all the way down to 0%. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to act like a hit state. So whenever we hover over any part of this, it's going to see that we're hovering over our movie clip button. And hopefully we won't get some of that same weird behavior that we saw before. So let's hit Control Enter to test again. And now when we hover over it, you'll notice that we don't get any of that weird behavior that we saw before. Sometimes text will interfere with the functioning of a button. But if you just add some kind of invisible movie clip on top of it, then it basically gets rid of that weird interaction. Okay, so now that we've done that, all we've done is we've created a movie clip that's bigger than our button, just a little bit bigger. We've converted that to a movie clip and set the alpha to 0 to make it invisible. So we can still hover over it, but we don't see it. Okay, so let's lock all of those layers. Go back to scene 1. And now let's create multiple buttons. Now we're not going to do that in this video. It's already getting kind of long. But in the next video, we're going to take a look at how to create multiple buttons that behave the same way, but they're going to be different buttons. They're going to be separate buttons. So let's lock our buttons layer for now. We'll save this as mcbutton02.fla. We'll save that, and we'll move on with the next video.